Good. Well, welcome everybody. Um, I will get those slides. We'll maybe give one more minute before I start. But I'm really glad to be able to share this slideshow because I've been a fan of Helen Pluckrose for a number of reasons, of which I'll share during the presentation. But I think she's a really courageous example of someone who isn't right wing and isn't left wing, but is outstandingly liberal and very a wise person, but also a humble person, and that's one of the reasons I quite enjoy talking about her. So the title is "The Wit and Wisdom of Helen Pluckrose." My tiny screen was right now filled up with with the screen share and with your pictures. So I will be welcome comments and questions at the end. It might be best to hold them to the end, but do jot them down or make sure that nothing goes by. So I thought that it would be useful to start the presentation by letting you actually hear Helen herself, and you'll get a sense of who she is. This is a from an interview at a podcast, and does it play? Oh no! And it looks like it is. As I click on this, nothing happens. I click over here. Oh dear.
Don't you have to be full screen to click on it?
Have to be full screen as in, I guess I'm not sure. I think that we're going to have to wait on that.
I think she means that it's not, the screen isn't taking up the whole page here. We're seeing all of the little PowerPoint screens at the bottom and to the side.
Yeah, you've got to go down to the bottom of the PowerPoint where it says full screen or display. Otherwise, you're in a little bitty version and the click won't work. At least that's my recollection. It's been a long time.
Okay, sorry. Down at the bottom of my screen.
In your PowerPoint presentation, Terry,
Yeah.
you should be able to go into full screen mode as opposed to slide view mode, which is basically you've got the view of the slides along the bottom.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just don't see that. Boy.
At the top of your screen, it seems to say use slideshow. I wonder what would happen if you clicked on that.
Okay. Oh, now there we go.
Do think about this a lot because people keep, they assume that history is going to unfold in more liberal and more positive ways. I'm not at all sure that it is. So I keep thinking maybe in 100 years, I don't know if we're going to be living in a right-wing hellscape, a left-wing hellscape, a religious theocratic hellscape. And I would urge people to care about what is true. So the two things that, and I'm actually having it on my gravestone, I have left rules for this. She just wanted you to value evidence-based epistemology and consistently liberal principles. Is have a look at other societies which are way less liberal than we are, and what it is like to live, say, under an Islamic theocracy or in Russia, and think about how liberal we still are. How much better it is to live in the society that we do live, actually appreciate that.
So, anyways, you get a sense of who she is as a speaker. Obviously, you can catch her English accent. Helen was 17 years in social services, mostly caring for aged people in public institutions. And then she got injured, and like I guess many adults, that's a great time to go back to university. So she did a master's degree in early modern studies with a focus on the ways in which medieval women negotiated the Christian narrative. And she did graduate with her master's degree, and she was interested in pursuing it as a doctoral program. But the medieval kind of stance on on women that she really wanted to study and write about, she said that she couldn't move forward in the academy because she couldn't frame it in terms of a race issue. And she said, like, racism was hardly even invented well, it wasn't invented in the Middle Ages, but that was the focus of the university where she applied. So then she spent a couple of years sort of on the edge of academia, and I'll get into the grievance studies affair. And then she was the editor in chief of Arrow magazine. It was a British-based sort of a liberal magazine that went for 5 or 6 years, but it ceased publication. Like many magazines, it's hard to compete in paper these days. Then she went on to, put her thoughts into action by she founded and was the first director of Counterweight, and that's a non-government organization providing legal and other assistance to those who got fired or discriminated due to non-compliance with woke ideals. And today she is a freelance writer, a podcaster. You can support Helen if you wish by joining her Substack. I think it's $100 a year. And once a week, she sends you an audio and a text version of what she's thinking about or comments about modern life. And I find it's a really nice thing to go for a nice long walk and listen to Helen. Where I first, I guess, got intrigued by this is in Canada, we had a big debate about the eighth principle. And my former U minister, she told me that critical race theory is a very well-established field in academia. And I was an editor of a peer-reviewed scholarly journal for 10 years, and I know about scholarship and publication, and I went to Google Scholar and I punched in critical race theory, and I was astounded. 3,850,000 results. That does not mean that there's 3 million articles, but that people who write reference other people who have written about critical race theory, and it kind of is a pure mental thing that sort of grows on itself. So there is no doubt that it is a well-established field. The question is, it's well established, but is there any quality there, or what does it take to publish in this field? And Helen, along with Peter Bohazian and James Lindsay, they decided to put this to an empirical test, and they targeted a number of leading journals. They kind of read the kind of articles that were being published. And they gave the term grievance study, and they defined it as a subcategory of academic areas where a culture has developed in ways which only certain conclusions are allowed, and they put social grievances ahead of objective truth. And I think that's really important, is that it's not so much the truth, it's what does this spin do for the social justice that they're trying to create. And so these three created 20 articles that promoted deliberately absurd ideas or morally questionable acts. And when they were exposed, 4 of their papers had been published, 3 had been accepted but not published, and 7 were still under review. So I'll just show you an example of one of those. This was you'll see from Gender, Place, and Culture as a Rutledge, a very well-known academic publisher. And it was withdrawn after it was published when they found out it was a hoax. But the human reactions to rape culture and queer performativity at urban dog parks in Portland, Oregon, they reported there that they had observed in this dog park and they had taken observations of 10,000 dogs examining their genitals. But all the data was destroyed to protect the privacy of the dogs. And they concluded that there was a pervasive rape culture rampant and queer performativity. I had to look up what performativity was. But it gives you an example, and the other one that I like was they wrote one about how the penis is a social construct, and I happen to own one of those, and I know it is more than a social construct. But and Helen also, I heard her interviewed where she was talking about this hoax, and she said that at first their articles were rejected, and she said she realized that she didn't really have a very in-depth knowledge herself of postmodern theory. And so she read Foucault and all of the French and other philosophers and American ones to try to so that she could understand, because the people writing these articles and reading them are not, they are intelligent people. They know how to spin ideas and how to do research and to sort of work stories around into a scholarly publication. So after she had gone through this sort of a deep schooling in postmodern thought, she started getting their papers accepted. And I'll just have a quick sideline. I used to teach research methods in the doctoral program at Athabasca. And one of the things that I taught the students was they really had to think, what does research mean to you, and what kind of research? What's the research paradigm that's driving your work? And the first one is the positivism quantitative. That's Marie Curie there on the picture. And what they're having to do is, you measure things, you have hypothesis. This is really the science of scientific publication. And reliability, validity, those are really important constructs. And then we got into the qualitative era, where it was much more constructivist, where it didn't matter what we were after was the insider perspective. What do some people feel about this or think about this, rather than trying to measure what the average is? We want, look at it from the inside. And the third one is the pragmatic, and that's John Dewey, and that's kind of research that I like to do, where you did an intervention and then you measured it using qualitative and quantitative, or whatever is practical to to expose a truth. But we're a lot of critical studies, and it comes in critical race theory, is the paradigm they're working on is it isn't as important to expose truth as it is to expose ideas that will change and expose power relationships, and really help the oppressed to throw off their shackles through knowledge. And you'll see this running through all of the critical theories that it'll get to next. So if you haven't read Cynical Theories, the book, I would really highly recommend it. I know that just shortly after the whole the whole thing came out with Todd Eckloff, and I didn't really understand, what critical theory was all about in much depth until I read this book. And so she talks about it being a radical new ideology has recently emerged amongst college-educated Americans. And you can see critical theory, wokeness, social justice, criminal social justice, critical race theory, all kind of meaning the same sort of a way to look at research and what the mission of the academy is. And the characteristics of this ideology include intense moralism and intolerance of other ideas, radical skepticism of the possibility of progress, rejection of a single objective reality except their own, of course, pervasive pessimism, cynicism, and despair, and opposition to truth, science, and logic, which are seen as just tools of the oppressor. And I remember when the UUA and followed by the CUC had those surveys about widening the circle, and they had all of this survey data about these anecdotes about people who were treated poorly because of the white supremacy culture that pervades Unitarian Universalism, and they never released the results of those surveys, because again they weren't they weren't interested in having people draw their own conclusions. They were interested in moving the institution or in educating white people about their whiteness, and and so it's research, but it's for a purpose. And the other nice thing about, or interesting thing about this book is that how it runs from race theory to critical gay and lesbian studies to queer studies to trans studies to fat ideologies. And they all have a common ideological base based in postmodern studies. So as I said, she started the Counterweight Handbook, and basically it was an organization that gathered funds and hired lawyers or gave advice to people, mostly in the UK, who had been fired or discriminated against because they refused to, I don't know, take white supremacy classes or, well, I'll show you an example here. This is Richard Bilkstoto. He was a Toronto school principal. He filed a lawsuit against the school board relating to the online anti-racism training session where he had been forced to attend. And he claimed to have been referred to as a white supremacist by the trainer and berated in front of his colleagues when he had disagreed that Canada was more racist than the US. And as a result of the reputation and the sort of slings and arrows thrown at him, he committed suicide in 2023. There was nobody to come to his help and to, give him some both legal and some moral support. So that's what Counterweight was all about. And she ran it for 2 years, and and that's when the term woke was such a contested term, whether you went back to its original civil rights meaning, a positive meaning, or the sort of cynical meaning that that I've tended to use the term. But Helen says it's a wokeness as an attempt to institutionalize a common good, and that it turned out very badly. And I think you can see that as you can see the results of that in the US, where the anti-DEI kind of thing just propelled the Trump forces to victory in the election, and I think really hindered the liberals in the Democratic Party. So if this confuses you even more about the difference between left and woke, Susan Nyman is an American who lives in Germany, wrote a very interesting book titled Left is Not Woke. And she basically said that there's a real difference. The classic leftists were universalists. They weren't tribalists. They weren't working, to support only women or only blacks or whatever. They were saying universal rights are universal rights for all of us. They also had a problem differentiating between what was power and what was justice. That if you were powerless, then things you said were more truthful or more just. And vice versa. If you had all the power, then you couldn't really be called or act in a just kind of a way. And the third thing was that the left has always had this idea that we're progressing, that we've screwed up in the past, we can do better, we will do better. But the cynicism of some critical race theories is that if you do some small good thing, then those with power will just stomp it out and make it not work. So don't even bother, kind of thing. And she's in one of her articles. She says, "Why do we get into so many fights these days?" And she says that liberals who oppose authoritarianism, we tend to go where there is authoritarianism, and so we tend to get into fights with the UUA or with other organizations that we find that we just like they're doing wrong in our opinion, and we end up arguing, and they get defensive, and we tend up to spend in, and that's why the work of Braver Angels and other organizations is so important. So then she's always talking about what liberalism is. I'm getting a little feedback from, maybe it's from Cheryl's, I don't know. Liberalism begins with a simple but revolutionary recognition that human beings are fallible. Disagreement is inevitable, and yet we must somehow organize our society. And this creates the liberal problem. How do conscious beings pursue truth and build institutions across disagreement, uncertainty, and difference? And she says being a liberal isn't a political position. It's a foundation that makes political positions possible. And the liberalism's genius is it doesn't require consensus on ultimate values to create functional societies. We don't all have to believe in the same theories or have the same ideas on even controversial issues such as capital punishment or abortion. I mean, we might think that everyone in our congregation or all of my friends think this way, but we might be surprised, and we might get into some dire arguments. And another bit of advice I got from Helen was that we don't have to have a position on everything. I don't have to have, clear ideas about fat phobia or I don't, it's not my responsibility to worry about everything. And if you read the Stoicism session that Stephen gave, that's one of the Stoics' idea too, is that we don't have to worry about things we cannot influence or control. So again, I'm sure that you're all familiar with the liberal ideals and the institutions that are necessary to support it. The one that's always contentious is the free market. Is the free market a component of liberal democracy or not? And I like to think that we have governments in order to curtail and to guide free markets, but we don't have governments that are the free market. So then, if we know what liberal is, but what does illiberal mean? And the dictionary definition is the characteristic of being either extremely narrow-minded or ungenerous. It's a term for ideologies that reject core tenets of liberalism, including individual freedoms, checks and balances, and open societies. It often champions majorityism, and you see that where a majority says, well, we're in power, we've got the majority vote, and therefore we're going to take rights away from minorities. And we see this happening in countries like Hungary, and I think we see it in the States happening as well. It champions national sovereignty and cultural homogeneity. And so that we're talking about all of the things that culture that makes us the same from an illiberal position. And so then if you're anti-woke, as I am, are you a right-winger? As I'm not. And I think that's one of our big challenges is that that there are so many weird right-wingers who have very anti-woke ideas. And I've always been on the left side of the political spectrum and still am. But that doesn't mean that I can't criticize woke kind of ideals, whether it's in our churches or in our government. So and it's really easy for people, the extreme left, to say, well, if there's any criticism, well, you're just a right winger, or you're using right wing talking points, or you're just pushing an agenda that's completely foreign to our own. So then they started talking about a right wing woke, and if you look at what are the characteristics of wokeness, but on the right wing, things like silencing And you certainly hear that when people are not allowed to speak out, or ideas are not allowed to be shared. Identity and racialized politics. We see that with the white supremacist movements, and an aggressive response to any criticism or counter argument, fervor sense of oneness and a common focus on change, and rejection of internationalism, which we certainly see well, in the States, actually in Canada, we're embracing internationalism these days. But many illiberal notions and actions from the right wing. So it might make sense to talk about right wing woke, but I think the extreme left is sort of still has a monopoly on the term in the popular talk. So what are the woke? Can you have a woke conspiracy theorist? You know that the right wing it's terrible for having conspiracy theories that seem to get amplified on social media and go on forever. But if we expand it to include the belief that we live in a white supremacist, cis, heteronormative, imperialist, patriarchal rape culture perpetrated by international power, internalized power dynamics, and the language we use as a result, it becomes clear that the extreme left also has conspiracy theories very deeply built into their thinking. And those that hold the truth is subjective. And that's one of the lived experience that a lot of these researchers talk about, is that it basically leads to believe irrational falsehoods and conspiracy theories. So Helen says that liberal principles are at the center of their moral compass. For most broadly liberal-minded people, they're not. Their primary moral framework may be something else: left-wing politics, right-wing politics, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, feminism, anti-racism, gay rights, etc. So you don't have to dedicate your life to seeking out and opposing authoritarianism wherever you find it, but expanding your scope and noticing it, especially when it's in your own group. And this is on my email, a quote from Helen, where she says, "Let people believe, speak, and live as they see fit, provided it does no material harm to others, nor denies them the same freedom." And consistent liberals really are the biggest threat to authoritarians of all kinds, because their principles are coherent, ethical, and pervasive to anyone who isn't an authoritarian. She's got a great post on why do so many people hate me. And she gets viral condemnation from the right wing and from the left wing. And she tries to sort of walk that final line of liberalism. And she's seen as a heretic by some illiberal people who think that she must be a right-winger with left-wing clothes on or something like that. And on social justice, and I think we have to take this one to heart, is that the social justice focus of modern Unitarian Universalism leadership, we have to do better social justice than they're doing. And I think that we have to get out in the trenches. We have to make liberal policies that work within our societies, regardless of well, in defense, to make social justice something that is real and not just slogans about helping other people and make ourselves feel better. And so rather than caring about this group and what is it in the interests of that group, it says we think everybody should be able to have this right, and currently this group cannot. And that's a problem. And so that's again the liberal imperative, is that we don't think that the world is perfect, but we think it can be made more perfect. And you probably get, or you've heard of David Cycleback. I think there's 2 or 3 of his articles in the latest UU Underworld. I like him because he's a Unitarian, and he writes prolifically about all sorts of ideas that I think you'll enjoy. If you want to subscribe to his email, you'll get 1 or 2 emails a week, and I always enjoy reading them. So my final slide is just building bridges. We have that's the theme of this conference, and we recognize that grievous bridge demolition can come from both the right wing and the left, and we have common needs and we have common hopes, and that they demand that we build bridges together, even those who have markedly different beliefs and culture than our own. And tolerance means welcoming discourse and trying to find universal or truths that we can live with and understand, even if they don't belong, that we don't accept them. And finally, resist at all costs the temptation to believe that because the other side holds the power, you are exempt from holding yourself to the high standards of truth and principle. So I've in this session, if you go to it, you can get a copy of these slides. But I also have a short bibliography of the major works that Helen has produced. The last word, she just wanted you to have evidence-based epistemology and consistently liberal principles. So with that, I will stop this share. And I welcome any comments or questions.
I guess.
Terry,
Oh no, you go ahead.
Terry, I just from your last slide suggests that she's passed on. Is she alive?
Yeah, she is very much alive. She lives with her husband in London, and her husband is a construction worker actually, and so. But if you go to Substack, or you just even type in her name into Google search, you'll come to her Substack, and you can subscribe to it if you want. Or if you type in her name, she's a popular guest on many podcasts, and so there's many YouTubes that feature her, and yeah, so she's certainly accessible, and or you can email her for that matter as well. Ken, go ahead.
Well, I work on this stuff really every day. So sometimes I'll go to the dollar store and buy little notebooks and a pack of pens, and in my various social circles, I'll hand them out. It's a bit of a joke, and yet it's quite serious too. And I'm just asking people to write down what they hear, whether on TV or in their social circles, about how society is run, things like who has the power and that kind of thing, who can be criticized and who can't be. And I invite them to compare that with the dominant social narrative. And what I'm saying is that several times a day, you can hear things that are just so completely opposite in terms of who has social cachet, social power. And so I'm just sharing that as an idea, and I'm encouraging everyone to develop your own style for kind of countering the wokeism out there, because it's still around. We may be past woke, but it's out there.
Okay, good idea. I think people have to examine their own beliefs as you suggest, and that's a tool to do it. Thank you for that suggestion, Ken.
So does Helen have any words of wisdom regarding our current controversies like Charlie Kirk and Jimmy Kimmel? If she does, I'm going to have to go out there and see what she has to say.
Yeah, she did have a post on Charlie Kirk, and she basically came down that it's such a failure that that we can't have a discourse, that you can have a rational discussion about some of the things that he has said. The right wingers who support him won't listen to it, and the left wingers don't want to listen, hardly even knew who Charlie Kirk was until he was killed. But she's also very clear that taking violence and as was done is never a solution. It just creates martyrs basically, and you really see that happening today. Yeah, go ahead, David.
Well, I'm just looking at her latest one, that I got in an email just the other day, and it's called "The Lie of Freedom of Speech is not freedom from consequence." And so she goes into the Charlie Kirk in that one. I just have her free version. I don't want to spend the money, or I'm too cheap to spend the money on the other one, but it would be nice to get. Um, the Her counterweight, a friend of mine, that goes to my church, because I still have a UU church that well, I don't know if I call it our church is called Unitarian. So, and then there doesn't seem to be as much talk up in Canada where I am, about UU. It's more Unitarian. My church is called a Unitarian church, and we go by Unitarian. Some people slide in Unitarian Universalist, but and I do our welcome every week, and I say that we're Unitarians Universalists, and we call ourselves, and some call us the Unitarian Universalists. So I don't know if it's quite as UU up here as it is in the US. Um, I was going to say that I'm also a fan of James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian, although James Lindsay got kind of far off to into a bit of craziness for a while, but he's the one that coined the term woke right. So he's the one that started that whole conversation about woke right.
Hmm.
And but yeah, during our eighth principle discussion, a friend of mine at church was trying to get Helen Pluckrose to get involved in that. So
Oh.
he was emailing her and talking to her through Twitter, directly on Twitter and everything, to try and get her involved in our eighth principle discussion to try and shut things down, but that never happened. So I don't think I have much else to say. I'm just going to pass something by that everybody talks social justice, and that's a term that's always bothered me. I always say social action, because justice makes a judgment, and some people, some high horse kind of people, will mean justice is what I think rather than what anybody else thinks. And so I try and stay away from that word justice. I would prefer action. A
Hmm.
lot of people disagree with me. And I am a slightly right-leaning gay man. And some people in my church just find that so annoying, because I'm supposed to be queer, which I'm not. That's a political ideology. And I am supposed to be extremely left-wing. And it baffles them that I'm not. So I try and fight that all the way.
Well,
But
I can only add that you're you're the only slightly right gay man that I quite admire. So I'm glad that you also follow Helen Pluckrose.
I love Helen.
I'd love to see her as a keynote on a summit conference one day. So who knows? Lincoln, go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you, Terry. This was I hadn't really focused in on Helen Pluckrose before, and I'm really glad I attended this session. You've provided great context. I'll be looking for her stuff. I did have one thing I wanted to share, which I'll put in the chat, which is on critical race theory. Kenneth Ng did a NAUA presentation maybe 2 years ago now on critical race theory, which is left versus left. What's happening here ain't exactly clear, which of course is a reference to the Buffalo Springfield song. And it was that presentation. For several years, I was trying to understand what the heck is critical race theory, and you kind of touched on it. But Ken goes into it in great detail, talking about the three currents that make up critical race theory: standpoint theory, the critical
Intersectionality.
theory, and intersectionality. And it is definitely worth seeing if you haven't seen it, if you want to understand critical race theory. I just wanted to share that. It's in the chat now. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yes, that recording is on the NA Unitarian site under the Academy section, past recordings. Go ahead, Pat.
I was going to mention Ken Ng too. He had actually two sets of videos that talks about the postmodernism part of critical race theory. And that's what keeps people from saying that makes them say there is no such thing as objective reality. Everything comes from inside you. That's why everything's a social construct. And he gets it down to the fact that it really depends on your epistemology, how you search for knowledge and what you value, what your values are about that knowledge. Like the epistemology of Western Enlightenment is rationalism, is
Mm.
that you're going to go in and you're going to do research, you're going to use the scientific method, you're going to reason and logic and draw your conclusions. That is not true for people that believe in postmodern critical race theory. Anyway, go like Lincoln was saying, see those videos if you're interested, because it gave me my first real understanding of where this was going and scared the hell out of me, quite frankly. It was right after Ken that I read Cynical Theories, which is Pluckrose and Lindsay's thing, and then Ann Snyder's thing on the white supremacy culture in UU. You put all those things together, and you can see why, a lot of us are still out here saying, I'm not woke, but I'm liberal. I've even gone so far. I've seen progressives swallow this whole thing because they say that I guess I'm not progressive. I'm not that left. I'm liberal. And that's the first thing that I've been reading her Substack since she started it. And I think part of it is because she agrees with me on some of the really crazy stuff out there that's come out under woke, not the least of which is some of the gender stuff.
Mm.
So I really like her. I wish I'd love to have her at a summit. That'd be great.
Okay, thanks, Pat. And Ken Ing's Left is Not Left video is by far the most watched NAUA thing that we have on the YouTube. So it it was very well received and very well done. Go ahead, Roy.
Unmute here. Yeah. So I think most people just want things to work. I think the people who seem like they're in charge, whether it be in academia or political parties or whatever, seem like they're more interested in the ideologies, and they don't represent us. And it's like it's like one side's got their foot on, like two people in a car trying to drive it. One's got their foot on the accelerator and the other one's got their foot on the brake, not going anywhere, right? You're either gonna if anyone wins, then they're either gonna drive off the cliff or not go anywhere. And that just seems like what's going on. So I mean, just finding things that work. And I think that's and what's been going on, especially with DEI and the whole woke thing certainly hasn't worked. So that's my 2 cents. I guess I'm more like David. I think I'm mostly center right. I just call myself a small C conservative, and I think that means getting things to work. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you, Roy. Yeah. Final comment or question? Yeah, go ahead, Twinkle.
So I had heard about the fake scholarly papers. I didn't know the names of the people behind it. And so thank you for that, bringing that to light. It occurs to me that she really highlighted the tribalism that is so enmeshed in our society, right? You get these papers that are published, so they were received as factual and well researched, and they had some support behind them just because of the places that they were published in. And
Mhm.
and so you see that in all the conversations that are taking place on all the different sides of the aisle. That actually, it occurs to me, what was this is a divergent thought. The Canadian program that was it This Hour has 22 minutes, and they would send a, a reporter to an American college and ask them bizarre questions and get bizarre answers,
Yes.
and or give quotes. They would give quotes and by probably Republicans and cite them as if they were liberal quotes and garner great agreement until the reporter was like, oh, no, that was this other person saying this. And you can just see people's minds change in that instant. Oh, well, the quote wasn't, worthwhile after all, if that's who actually said it.
Yeah.
And so I like the way that she brings that kind of thing to light with the work that she's doing. So thank you for bringing this all to our attention.
Right. Yeah, I think you see that too in, well, if the person is a minister, then that must mean they have a sort of a greater insight or authority. And yet, I looked at the
Wait a minute,
curriculum.
don't we? Don't we?
Um, well, there are certainly exceptions, Twinkle. I looked at the curriculum starting for their Masters of Divinity program to be trained as a Unitarian minister, really. And I was shocked. It was just, there was so much social justice from from an illiberal perspective in my mind. And so I started to really the groupthink and the validity that comes from a lot of people saying these same things and publishing them in journals, the UU World, and you start to think, well, if doesn't sound right to me, it must be me, that I must not be thinking correctly or some such thing. And so you get a big herd mentality. I remember when the eighth principle was being hotly contested in Canada. There was, I don't know, 6 or 7 UU ministers, Canadian UU ministers, who all gave impassioned speeches how unless you were an outright racist, you must support this this move, and it was just calling authority based on other authorities that that are suspect, is just what you pointed out, Twinkle. So thank you. Yeah, David.
I have a friend who is studying to be a UU minister, and yeah, she's the wokest person that I know. We have great discussions because I disagree with her about most things, but she told me a while ago, because I was telling her that, there's nuance to all this, and she told me that nuance was a characteristic of white supremacy culture.
Yeah.
So, so that I think Helen Pluckrose would have a lot of fun with that one. She's a
The
wonderful
response,
person,
the
and she wants.
response is, the response is, Tima Okum has actually withdrawn white supremacy culture,
Yes.
the attributes, and it's been debunked.
Yeah.
I don't think
Yeah.
she withdrew them, though. I think she just sort of reframed them, and I don't think
Well,
they're
she
any better.
disavowed it as it was originally pushed by the woke.
Oh, I'll have to look that
Especially
up.
that poster that Smithsonian put out. She disavowed all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
And,
I think she reframed it, but I thought it was still all kind of there, just in different words. I'll have to check it out a little bit better.
but what bothered me about it was just there was zero empirical evidence for any
That's
of
right.
those
That's
characteristics.
so white supremacy. I mean, really, Terry. You don't need validity or reliability or any of
Yeah.
that stuff. That's white supremacy.
Well, a lot of those attributes are attributes of oppressed people too.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Kent.
So one thing you can notice, even with deeply conservative people, we've gotten used to saying, "Oh, and a black person believes this." A black conservative person believes this, and that kind of crept up on us. So we need to work on our not vocabulary, our response to say, well, why do you think a black person believing it gives in and of itself gives credit to it? It doesn't detract from it either. But it's so normalized, that kind of thinking across the board. Try being in Canada and saying, I'm sure that First Nations elder is a nice person. I don't care what they say more than anybody else. Give that a try at work sometime.
Yeah, it sounds like you want to get fired, Kent.
Yes, you will.
Okay, well, we are at the end of the time, and I thank each of you for sticking in and for these comments and questions. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the summit. And these recordings, as well as that list, will be accessible to people for a year. You can come back and watch any of them again if you want, or have a little watch party with a friend if there's anything that is particularly interested in. I invite you to do that. So thank you all, and have a good night.